This is a Mossad Files video extra. I'm Dan Raviv. I'm happy to be speaking again with Yaakov Katz, who's the co-author of a new book, an important book about what happened on October 7th, 2 years ago. The title is While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. Yaakov Katz, you wrote that book with Amir Bochbot. You, of course, are a former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Before that, military analyst, since then continuing to be obviously a defense and strategy analyst, also with the Jewish People Policy Institute. I know you've been traveling in the US and elsewhere, talking about your book and what we know about October 7th. Um, I'm wondering if you'd agree, Yaakov, if we go over some of the highlights of what an IDF report, an Israel Defense Forces report the other day, on what so far the army, the military, has concluded about October 7th failures. Okay with you if I read a few paragraphs and see how it kind of compares with what you know?
Sounds great.
Oh, okay. Now, this, by the way, is the printed I-24 news report online. It says IDF review panel, systemic and long-standing failures caused the October 7th catastrophe. And it says that the October 7th attack by Hamas was preventable. As we all know, more than 1,200 people in Israel were killed. More than 250 were kidnapped, became hostages. All live hostages have been released. And through a negotiating struggle, Hamas is being forced to return all the bodies of, frankly, of people that Hamas killed. But here's what the report says. A panel of military experts appointed to review the IDF handling of October 7th has concluded the massacre resulted from a systemic and long-standing organizational failure. The report found that the Army had access to high quality and exceptional intelligence before the assault, but failed to interpret it or issue a warning. The review determined that the Hamas attack, quote, did not emerge from an information vacuum. So let's start with the intelligence part of it, whether the Israelis should have known, had enough clues of what Hamas was planning. I mean, how do you frame that, Yaakov?
Well, Dan, the report that you refer to was a commission that was set up by the Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, and led by a former IDF general who actually was also at one point the head of the Southern Command, which is the regional command that's in charge of the Gaza Strip, Sami Turjaman. And they went through all of the different investigations that had been conducted by the IDF under the prior and the previous chief of staff, and they found some flaws with them. But when they looked into what had happened, I mean, there wasn't anything that really should surprise us too much. This was a strategic collapse of all of the different layers of what a military is meant to do, from the detection and the alert and the prevention or preemption of an attack of this kind, and that would be required by intelligence. There was the second layer, which is the defenses and the posture that you have along that border that's supposed to keep you safe. And then, of course, is one of the most troubling consequences of what happened on October 7th, which was the delays and just the chaos and the confusion and how long it took for the IDF to actually be able to stand up and launch a proper counteroffensive. So all of this together, if you look at just kind of the higher altitude perspective on this investigation that has come out from the IDF, is a lot of what we kind of knew, but now it's definitely getting that stamp of approval from the military commission itself.
Well, focus, please, especially on the intelligence, because people remember who know the Middle East that in 1973, the October War, the Yom Kippur War, Israel was taken by surprise by Egypt and Syria. But we learned later that there was inside intelligence, especially out of Cairo, someone very senior in the presidential office, who had told the Mossad an attack was coming. There were arguments later about the timing of that, whether perhaps that man was a double agent, and arguments between the Mossad and Amman, the military intelligence. So that was perhaps happening again. There were clues, there was information about Hamas preparations, but there were, what have you learned, disagreements in the intelligence structure of Israel?
The intelligence structure had and the different agencies, primarily in this case, Less has to do with Mossad, has much more to do with the Shin Bet, the Israel Security Agency, which was responsible for the Palestinian territories, and of course the Amman, as you mentioned before, military intelligence. And when we look at the uh, information that they had that was coming in throughout the night between this October 6th and of course the attack on October 7th, but even, and this is what the report refers to, is even in the months before, there was, for example, a known paper that had been prepared by intelligence analysts lower down within the IDF military intelligence directorate called The Walls of Jericho, which referred to the famous biblical walls of Jericho that came tumbling down back in the time of Joshua.
And
And
by
the
the way,
idea,
that name Walls of Jericho, was that an Arabic name from the Palestinians or the Israeli analysts' name for what Hamas was planning?
it was the name that was given, I think, by the Israeli analysts who gave that name, and that was basically because what they saw potentially coming from Hamas was an attack that would bring down the barrier that Israel, in this very sophisticated, what we believe to be an impenetrable barrier, it was going to bring it down along the border, like the walls, the ancient walls of Jericho. And I think that
Okay. So Israeli military intelligence analysts at a lower level uh, predicted at least the possibility that Hamas was planning to do that, would try to do that. No particular date on that analysis, right? That was around for a while. That's what Hamas would try to do. I can only imagine that some Israelis would have dismissed that and said, "Well, that's what they would try to do." But we have a multi-billion-dollar security fence and wall and sensors on the line.
well, this is part of that report that you quoted from that spoke about the high quality intelligence that was there before the assault. This is part of it. It knew that Hamas had been planning something. It knew that Hamas had these intentions. It knew that Hamas had operational battle plans to potentially jump across the border and launch a large scale offensive. But Israel was not able to act and prepare a adequate response to this possibility. It was believed to be unimaginable, and I think that that's where we ultimately saw the failure. It wasn't just in the information, because the information was there. It was in lacking the imagination to understand that this is something that could actually happen.
Well, let me go back to the report as written by I-24 News. Uh, According to the IDF findings, significant intelligence accumulated on that night of October 6th to 7th that, if properly analyzed, could have led to a clear warning and defensive action, meaning moving troops and tanks and actually doing something. Now, that was a holiday period, the holiday of Sukkot, and specifically Saturday, October 7th, Simchat Torah. I mean, is it true that the number of troops on duty to guard southern Israel was low because of the Jewish holiday?
Look, the you know this, Stan, that always whenever you're doing deployment along a border or along an active border in this case, your deployment is based on intelligence, especially when you have a military like the IDF, which is limited in resources. It's not an unlimited number of soldiers and unlimited number of tanks and aircraft. And therefore, you look at the intelligence, and a derivative of the intelligence is what are the troop numbers going to be along that border. That is what happens all the time. So there's intelligence, there's capabilities, and then you try to create the response. You have other fronts, the northern front, the West Bank, the southern border with Egypt, and on and on, and Judea and Samaria. So there's a lot of different active fronts where you have to deploy soldiers. What happened in the night between October 6th and October 7th was three primary alarm bells that went off. One was the story of the SIM cards, which is that about 100 Palestinians had switched their phones' SIM cards from the Palestinian one to an Israeli one, indicating a potential imminent attack. The second was the uncovering of rocket launchers. This is already in the middle of the night in Gaza, indicating a potential plan to begin launching rockets into Israel. And number three was the preparation of underground bunker systems, tunnel networks for top Hamas commanders. Israel was picking up signs on all of this. But what we know is that a lot of this intelligence, which was there, and this is again that Jericho Walls report was written a couple years earlier. That should have been in the background. So you have that in the background, and now you have all these indicators. This should have been enough for the IDF to say we need to raise the alert. We need to send more troops to the border. We need to reinforce our positions, and we need to get everyone awake and up and manning their positions. None of this happened, and that is ultimately that failure to analyze and understand correctly what was going on is what led to this great disaster.
Was the Jewish holiday a factor?
The Jewish holiday was a factor because, I mean, look, I think yes and I think no. On the one hand, a lot of the senior commanders were not in their bases. They were home for the holiday. Now, they're on the phones and they're talking to one another and they're doing an analysis of what's happening remotely. Some of the commanders were on base. The Gaza division commander was on base. Some of the brigade commanders were on base. Those are more of a tactical level. The Southern Command chief did come back to his base in Beersheba. But the operations chief stayed at home. The chief of staff stayed at home. The head of military intelligence was in a hotel. In a lot, the head of the Air Force was not woken up. I mean, you get the point. So it was this part of a holiday. I think the holiday made us less alert and sharp. But in general, if something like this happens even on a random Tuesday night, if people aren't in their offices, and that's what tends to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, people are not in their offices, then you are going to have to make these calls while wherever you are, whether it's home or somewhere else.
But that also indicates to me that there was an Israeli perception in both military and the intelligence side, again, not the Mossad, military intelligence and the Shin Bet, that Hamas has a lot of rockets. Of course, Hamas at any time could decide to attack Israel, especially using rockets. And not that's either no big deal that Israel has the Iron Dome system to shoot down almost all of them, and perhaps they were planning a difficult Saturday morning, but Israel didn't think anything worse than that, right?
When we spoke with people who were involved in excuse me in the deliberations throughout the night, the worst case scenario that came into their minds was the prospect of maybe an infiltration at 2 points along the border. Nothing more than that. What we saw was something that was unprecedented in scope and scale. And ultimately, thousands of people crossed into Israel. There were 60 points of different entry along the border. And Hamas was able to conquer parts of southern Israel and hold on to it for extended periods of time during that day. That was nothing that Israel ever imagined was possible. But you see, the painful part here is obviously the tragedy that happened. But it's that if we, and you know, you're an intelligence expert, so you understand this. If you have this Jericho Walls report, and now you have different alarm bells that are going off, if you had a proper flow of information, because what we also discovered is that the SIM card story, for example, was not known by everybody, right? So some of the information, as often happens in these cases, gets stuck in the flow and moving between the channels, between agencies. If we had the right way of sharing information, the correct context, and the right imagination, this would have been a whole different ballgame.
And some of what you said is reminiscent of what happened in the United States, as discovered afterward by the 9/11 Commission, that when there was the attack by Al Qaeda, the hijacked planes in September of 2001, that the intelligence agencies of the U.S. had a lot of indications, but did not connect the dots. Right, information about Al Qaeda's capabilities and intentions was somewhere in the system. The U.S. system is vast. The Israeli system has such a great reputation. Tell me who's had to pay the cost, because I know in the military there's a new chief of staff. You know, we'll leave Prime Minister Netanyahu out of it for a second because he's obviously still the same prime minister. But the defense minister was replaced. The chief of staff of the military has the IDF promised to do deep reforms because the Israeli people want to know this can't happen again.
The IDF has done a lot of reforms over the last 2 years and has done it, though, internally, right, without an external entity that has been investigating and looking into things. what this tends to mean. So, I mean, if we look at personnel changes, for example, Dan, you have a new chief of staff, you have a new head of Southern Command, a new head of military intelligence, a new operations chief. I mean, all the jobs have pretty much been replaced. There, you still have the same Air Force commander. Uh, he's now being replaced. In the Shin Bet, the director left, his deputies have left. So there's a whole change that's taken place there as well. Government is where you have zero accountability or changes, but we'll put that aside. The defense minister was replaced, but that was because he was fired ultimately by the prime minister, having to do with political battles between those two. I think that when we look at what's happened, though, there's no doubt that the military and the IDF, as you know, definitely certain branches of it, but overall as an institution is quite good at studying itself and self-reflection and investigations. But it's also a bit, an old boys club, and it's former generals who come in and investigate people who they used to sit around the same table with at the general staff meetings. I don't question their integrity and their sincerity, but I do personally see value in an external commission that is not just made up of the same group of people that I used to, fight with and serve in the army with. And I think that that is something that we've yet to see in the military. We've yet to see through the intelligence agencies. And it's something that's desperately needed, I think, for Israel.
Here on the Mossad Files, I'm speaking with Yaakov Katz, who's the co-author of While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. Let's just talk about the IDF so far investigating itself or assessing what the problems were. Even that panel led by General Turjaman that we're talking about, after reviewing 25 internal IDF investigations, the panel found wide variation in their quality, with many commanders acted with integrity, but some of the inquiries were incomplete or inadequate. I guess that speaks to what you're suggesting, that that old boys network, they're investigating themselves. It seems to cry out for some independent commission. And now that the Gaza war is practically over, President Trump negotiated, a big deal that changes things. Are there strong calls in Israel by powerful people to have some kind of independent inquiry as to what went wrong October 7th?
Most of the public actually wants what's referred to here as the State Commission of Inquiry. So it's a commission that is founded and established by the Knesset. It is the authority is given over to the Supreme Court, which then appoints the different members of that panel. And that is given great authority and basically the ability not only to subpoena people, but to make recommendations that can actually stick and have real life repercussions for those people involved. We've seen this over the years. You mentioned earlier in our conversation, Dan, the Yom Kippur War. The Agranat Commission is one of the more famous commissions of inquiry that were established by the State of Israel that found great flaws within the intelligence agencies and the IDF, and eventually led to the resignation of Golda Meir as Israel's prime minister. So we've seen most Israelis want that, and that's what polls show. The government and the prime minister himself is against a state commission of inquiry, has agreed for the time being to contemplate and potentially establish what would be called a governmental commission of inquiry. Now, the difference between state and government might seem just a word, but it actually has to do with the authority of who is appointing the people who are looking into this. We spoke about the old boys club in the IDF. Now imagine that the government, I am the ministers, I was in charge on October 7th. I'm going to appoint my friends to investigate me, right? So in a state commission, it gets handed off to the president of the Supreme Court, the chief justice in Israel, who then selects the members of the panel. Here, it would be the prime minister saying, oh, you three are my buddies, you come and investigate me. And we know we can expect how that will come out. So most of Israel is opposed to that. The opposition is definitely opposed to that. There have been some creative ideas of how to appoint the different people to the committee, but I think the way to look at this is that at the end, we have a system. It's worked for 78 years almost now, the State Commission of Inquiry. It's important. This is the law that we have. And I think that this is something that is desperately needed. The fact that it has yet to happen, in my view, is gross negligence.
Mm. Well, we know that in Israel there has to be an election within a year. The prime minister and his coalition you know, could fall apart and need to call an election or decide to call an election, but within a year. And I suppose the Likud party, the ruling party, might say, well, we'll let the voters decide. How did Netanyahu and his coalition, his government, uh, behave? Were they might have, there might have been terrible mistakes October 7th, 2 years ago, but since then, incredibly weakening Hezbollah in Lebanon, successfully hitting Iran's nuclear program, getting the U.S. to help in that. On the side, Syria's regime fell. And so, of course, Netanyahu has a lot to boast about. But I also understand that in General Turjaman's look at the situation, well, this again is according to I-24 News. The report points to an enduring gap between recent assessments. Here we are. The panel noted that throughout that year, 2023, senior officials were warning that Israel's enemies perceived growing internal division, right, inside Israel. And despite those warnings, military leaders failed to take the necessary actions to improve readiness. So, what have you written? What did you and Amir Bokhbat find for your book on the subject of the judicial reform controversies, big protests in the big Israeli cities? All through 2023, the country was very divided before the October 7th attack. Did that have an effect? Do you believe Hamas attacked in part thinking Israel was weakened by divisions?
First of all, we know from intelligence that Hamas saw the fighting that was taking place and the division within Israel as an opportunity. But even without that intelligence, Dan, let's just use our joint common sense for a moment. Any country, any adversary, imagine for a moment you're in the business world and you want to take over a company, and you notice that at the top of the company, the shareholders are fighting and the staff is fighting. Is that not a good opportunity to stick yourself in and try to create more of an opportunity for you to take over the company? Imagine you want to steal away someone's spouse, God forbid, and you see that the couple's fighting. Is that not an opportunity? Why would we think that we would be different? If we saw the Iranians fighting, if we saw the Lebanese and Hezbollah fighting, if we saw his Hamas fighting, would we not try as a country to achieve our strategic objectives? Of course we would. Why would we think that they wouldn't do the same? And
And
and there's
Hamas, and you're saying Israel's enemies, that it certainly includes Iran, but Hamas knows Israeli society, monitors everything in the Israeli media and politics, right?
I think what we did not fully appreciate as a country is to the extent with which they follow everything. Yahya Sinwar, the now dead leader of Hamas, but the architect and orchestrator of October 7th, was someone who had spent a lot of time in Israeli prisons, spoke fluent Hebrew, met with the hostages in the tunnels, was able to converse with them in perfect Hebrew. He read biographies of Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Rabin, former prime ministers, while he was serving his sentence in jail. He had a unique take and pulse of the Israeli people. He would follow the Israeli media. I think we didn't fully appreciate how much he and well he and others understood what was happening among ourselves.
Can I get a couple of remarks from you on current events, if you will? There are disagreements between the United States and Israel as to what to do next in the Gaza Strip. President Trump wants to make his plan, the 20 points, look like a total success. And Israel sometimes has other goals. Now, so far, I think the U.S. has permitted the IDF to take care of some business, right? In the part of the Gaza Strip that the Israeli forces still hold, gun battles have broken out, right? Hamas members have been killed. Some IDF soldiers have been killed. But the U.S. has a bigger plan that might even allow Qatar and Turkey to have active roles in Gaza. That's alarming to Israel, isn't it?
That is particularly alarming. Israel is very concerned about the role that the Qataris and the Turks would potentially play. Neither of them are friends of the state of Israel. We've seen the real vile anti-Semitism that has come out of the government of Erdogan in Turkey. We've seen the support that Qatar has given over the years to Hamas, and the prospect that they are going to be the ones who are going to be deployed on the streets and they're expected to keep Israel safe and secure, that would be a terrible idea and is not something that would work at all.
Well, what might work for the next few years in the Gaza Strip? It's rather obvious. Rubble has to be cleared, housing has to be built, right? 2 million people are not going to leave. They're almost all angry at Israel, and they might be angry at Hamas, their previous rulers, who are still hanging around trying to be the rulers. And what could work for the next few years?
Well, it's a good question. I think what people need to realize here is that we are at a very delicate moment in the next phase of the ceasefire. What we have for now, this isn't a peace treaty. This is not a comprehensive agreement. What we have so far is a ceasefire and a swap. We got back hostages and hostage bodies. Not all of them have been returned, by the way. And Hamas got about 2,000 prisoners. It was a swap and a ceasefire with that swap. Israel is now deployed in 50 something percent, 53% of Gaza. And Hamas is really in control of the other 47%. The three key phases that need to come, or four, sorry. One is the new governing entity that needs to be established in Gaza. The Americans are working on this. Who exactly is going to be the head of it, the face of it, the front of it is less important, but the Americans plan to keep their hand on the wheel. But they will be the face of whoever is going to rule Gaza. It will not be Hamas. Number two, and this connects to number three, number two is the disarmament of Hamas, so taking away their weapons and destroying their tunnels and taking away their rockets. And then three is the establishment of what's called the ISF, the International Stabilization Force. This is this multinational force that's supposed to actually police Gaza, keep Gaza safe, stop Hamas, prevent Hamas from reconstituting and rebuilding. And then there's four. And number four is the reconstruction of Gaza, which is all dependent on those other three actually working. Because if Hamas is not disarmed, and if there is no new government and there is no new ISF, no one's going to give money and no one's going to rebuild Gaza. So this will unfortunately just keep on going. And therefore, it's good to be skeptical. It's good to be hopeful also, because we need some hope here. But I think we also have to recognize that this is a massive undertaking, a huge challenge, and there's no easy fix. Where we are right now is good, but I don't know to tell you, Dan, that we're going to get to that next stage and it's actually going to work.
Okay, it could in fact fail and fail in an obvious and perhaps bloody way. All right, we're agreeing to that, and we don't know what the United States can achieve. Is it true? Just a final point, if I may, that the United Arab Emirates, which has open and official relations with Israel and has been extremely patient even through the 2 years of the Gaza war, I think many were counting on the UAE to play a great role with money and maybe even troops. But I'm hearing recently the UAE thinks it's all too messy and dangerous and unstable as of now.
Here's the way to look at it. And I'm speaking with a lot of these different members and countries and representatives as well to understand. And what I hear from all of them is pretty much the same. Nobody is going to send their soldiers, their troops into Gaza, into a place where they might be at risk because Hamas is still on the ground. So it's kind of a chicken egg situation. You could say, one second, first deploy, then disarm. They would like to see Hamas disarmed before they deploy. But I think that what we know, and this is the real truth, nobody is going to fight Hamas on Israel's behalf. No one is going to disarm Hamas on Israel's behalf. No one's going to put their soldiers at risk on Israel's behalf. And therefore, with that understanding and knowing that Hamas is still there, still on the ground, not disappeared, not eliminated, can we still somehow create a potential path forward that keeps the calm, rebuilds Gaza, gives the people of the Palestinian territory a potential future of prosperity, gives Israel the security that it needs, and de-radicalizes in the longer term Gaza? That's a tough one. That's a big, big one.
All right, as we've discussed, maybe yes, maybe no. That'll have impact also on the Israeli political scene, whether Prime Minister Netanyahu can claim that he has achieved a success, ended the Gaza war successfully, hit Israel's enemies. He promised to get rid of Hamas's governing power, and we don't know if that's occurred, and so that has political impact. I have a feeling we'll be speaking about this for many months and years because it won't be easy, at least that. Yaakov
Yeah.
Katz, I thank you very much. Of course, you and Amir Bochbod are the authors of an important book called While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. There's a lot to know inside the book, and we learn more also day to day. Yaakov Katz, thanks very much for speaking with the Mossad Files.
Thank you, Dan.
You can find our audio podcast, The Mossad Files, on all the major podcast sites. Also, I'd like to mention my books. Over my shoulder, you can see Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars, which I co-authored with Yossi Melman. Also, Yossi Melman and I have a new book called Target Iran. It's an e-book, a short book, very inexpensive, revealing how the Mossad penetrated Iran and set up the war in June of this year. So have a look if you'd be kind enough at my books. And also, of course, the Mossad Files with Dan Raviv. My thanks again to Yaakov Katz. Bye-bye now.